In 2024, a large brown bear in northern Yellowstone was killed after repeated livestock attacks, a routine decision. But during the stomach exam, things took a dark turn. Instead of animal remains, biologists found hiking gear scraps and a metal dental implant with a serial number. That tiny clue reopened a cold case, 2 tourists missing for 8 years. But the real horror wasn't the bear, it was what had happened to the bodies before it found them, especially one skull that told a much darker story. The story begins in August 2016. 30-year-old couple Daniel and Savannah Moore, hailing from South Carolina, ventured into Yellowstone National Park, well-versed in tourism. They opted for a 3-day trek along the untamed and isolated Beechler River Trail, known as Cascade Corner due to its profusion of waterfalls and geysers. The terrain is picturesque but difficult, characterized by swamps, dense woods, and minimal human presence, offering an ideal sanctuary with nature. Daniel worked as a programmer, while Savannah was a graphic designer. They sought respite from urban living. On August 15th, they registered their itinerary at the trailhead, equipped with supplies for 3 days, extra provisions, a map, and a well-prepared plan. Their intended departure from the park was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. The last known sighting of them alive was by Park Ranger Mike Donovan, around 10 miles away from the trailhead in the afternoon on the same day. On patrol, he encountered Daniel and Savannah, who appeared cheerful. They requested directions to an uncharted hot spring. He provided guidance, noting their preparedness and self-assurance. Their conduct didn't raise any suspicions. He bid them good luck and resumed his journey. The last verified interaction was on August 18th. On Thursday, Daniel and Savannah missed their scheduled exit time at the trial point. Initially, no one considered it unusual. Time miscalculations occur in wilderness. Tourists might have underestimated time, grown weary, or opted to extend their park stay. However, when 6 hours elapsed without any word from them, the on-duty ranger triggered the alert. The protocol followed was standard. If tourists don't respond within a specific time post-scheduled date, a search operation is initiated. Dear friends, please help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It will motivate us to make more videos like this for you. The old Subaru belonging to them remained parked at the trailhead's parking lot. Its contents, a road map, empty water bottles, and some spare change were in order. Nothing out of the ordinary. The following morning, a team of 6 rangers and 2 volunteers embarked on the trail, optimistic about the weather. They adhered to Murakami's described route, calling out their names. By noon, they had arrived at the assumed location where the couple had spent their second night, given the typical travel speed in such terrain. However, the place was deserted, no signs of a presence. The group continued towards the hot springs that the couple had inquired about from Ranger Donovan. It was here, near a stream's dip, that they stumbled upon the camp, or what remained of it. The discovery was perplexing. The tent still stood upright, but a small burned and melted area near its entrance suggested damage. This area measured approximately 1 foot square. The scene suggested that someone or something had scorched the tent fabric, possibly by using a heating element or setting it ablaze. Various items were strewn about the tent. Sleeping bags had been displaced from their cases and lay on the ground. Multiple packages of freeze-dried food had been ripped open, with their contents, rice, pasta, dried fruit, spread across the grass. However, what was most peculiar was that the food remained untouched. If a large animal such as a bear or other predator were responsible, it would have consumed everything. Instead, the food appeared scattered haphazardly, suggesting anger or haste. The cooking pot was close by, slightly deformed. The backpack stood near the tree, but its contents had been rummaged through and some items tossed aside. These rangers were seasoned veterans. They'd witnessed countless campsites plundered by grizzlies. This situation didn't resemble any of those. In a bear attack, everything would have been disorganized, the tent would have been destroyed, and no remnants of food would remain. In this instance, the atmosphere resembled either a domestic disagreement or hasty departure, marked by no indications of fighting, bloodshed, or nearby large beasts at the campsite. The dogs dispatched to the location behaved oddly, sensing a scent from the tent, tracking it for numerous yards to the river and then failing to detect it further. It seemed as though Daniel and Savannah had approached the water and disappeared. A comprehensive search operation was initiated. Over the ensuing days, helicopters, additional volunteers, and survival experts joined the effort. They scoured the region meticulously, inspecting the riverbed downstream and scrutinizing every cave and crevice within the area. Nothing materialized. No signs at all, not a shred of clothing, discarded gear, or anything else. Interviews with fellow travelers in the vicinity at the time produced no useful information. Some had sighted the couple from afar, but nobody interacted with them or observed any unusual behavior. The lone clue emerged from a fellow traveler who pitched his tent approximately half a mile from Murov's campsite. He was identified as a solitary man hailing from Idaho. Upon inspection by rangers, his campsite was no longer visible. He had departed the park as scheduled and, based on records, hadn't raised any red flags. After the search commenced, he was contacted over the phone. He mentioned hearing voices at night but dismissed them as other tourists, deeming it insignificant. He reported no screams or signs of struggle. This was all. As time passed, a week, then another, the search operation was gradually scaling down. The hope of finding Daniel and Savannah alive was dwindling. There were 3 primary hypotheses, yet none could account for all the peculiarities. The first speculation pointed towards an accident. Perhaps they had drowned in the river or tumbled off a cliff somewhere off the trail. However, if so, why did their camp appear unusual? The second assumption was an animal attack. But then, why were there no signs of struggle or predator remains? These questions remained unanswered as the investigation continued. However, contrary to common bear encounters, this situation was atypical. The third and unsettling hypothesis was that it was a case of foul play. Maybe they had crossed paths with someone harmful on the trail, who had murdered them and subsequently attempted to pass it off as a bear attack, but clumsily so. The scorched edge of the tent might have been an unsuccessful effort to destroy evidence. However, this theory lacked the most essential piece of proof: the bodies. The question remained, how could 2 adults vanish in such a wild yet confined area? Months turned into years. The tale of Daniel and Savannah Moore became one of Yellowstone's enigmatic mysteries. Their faces graced documentaries on missing persons. Despite their families holding on to hope, the case was officially closed. No fresh leads, no witnesses, only an emptiness that persisted for 8 years. Until the spring of 2024, when wildlife officers responded to a farmer's complaint about a bear. In spring 2024, it became clear that hunters pursuing the bear weren't simply tracking an animal. They were uncovering an answer long perplexing everyone. Enclosed within the bear was this elusive answer, and it was astounding. Thus, a large male bear weighing over 500 pounds was captured and subjected to an autopsy in a lab. The purpose was to rule out rabies or other illnesses as potential causes for the animal's unusual aggression. Inside its stomach, remains of domestic livestock were found as anticipated. However, there was also something unexpected: pieces of durable, undecomposed bright blue synthetic fabric and a nearly pristine metal object. A biologist discovered that a washed object wasn't part of a collar or trash. It was a titanium dental implant with a crown. This discovery raised concerns, as such items usually carry a unique serial number visible under magnification. The lab alerted the Park County Sheriff's Office, who received the implant for further examination. The experts used the serial number to identify the manufacturer, which led them to a Charleston, South Carolina clinic where this specific batch of implants had been sold. With this information, the dental clinic traced the patient who received the implant with that serial number, identified as Daniel Moore. This cold case of 8 years suddenly gained attention in local media and soon spread across the nation. After 8 years of unrelenting uncertainty, the Moore family received a definitive fact for the first time. Yet this fact spawned even more inquiries. Chief among them was, where? The bear was slain in Yellowstone's northern region, approximately 60 miles from the Beckler Trail, where the Moores vanished. In Yellowstone, 60 miles is a sizable distance traversed by mountains, rivers, and dense forests. Bears can traverse extensive areas, but how did Daniel's remains wind up so far? This development defied all initial hypotheses. If they had drowned, their corpses would have been swept downstream by the Beechler River in a totally different direction. If they had been attacked by a predator, it would have occurred near their camp. The murder theory gained traction. Somebody had murdered them and transported the bodies to conceal them as far away and as securely as possible. The FBI and Wyoming State Police initiated a fresh search operation. Instead of locating missing individuals, this operation aimed at discovering a crime scene. Multitudes of agents and rangers, armed with advanced technology, began scouring an expanse approximately a few miles surrounding the spot where the bear was killed. They employed drones outfitted with thermal imaging cameras. However, they primarily relied on dogs specifically trained to detect human remains. The task proved arduous given the untamed landscape characterized by dense underbrush and rocky debris. On the third day of the search, a dog detected a scent. This led them to a ravine filled with fallen trees, approximately 1.5 miles from the farm where the bear had assaulted livestock. The dog started excavating at the base of a fallen tree. Agents cautiously cleared the branches and topsoil, revealing it, a human skull, relatively intact but coated in moss and dirt. It was dispatched to a nearby mobile lab for analysis, and upon cleaning, there was a moment of stunned silence among all present. The skull showed no signs of animal bite marks or fractures caused by falling. Instead, it exhibited a precisely horizontal, smooth cut spanning from temple to temple. This suggested that the top of the skull had been meticulously sawn off, indicating use of a tool rather than natural causes or surgery. The roughness of the markings ruled out surgical tools. Instead, they resembled those produced by a hacksaw or similar power saw with fine teeth. Tools more commonly associated with carpentry. This action occurred post-mortem and was intentional. A swift DNA analysis confirmed the skull belonged to Savannah Moore. With this evidence, the investigation now had two key facts. Fragments of Daniel's remains and fragments of Savannah's remain found together in a remote location away from their disappearance site, and one body or more was dismembered in a gruesome and unusual manner. The motivation behind sawing off a skull remains grim to speculate. Perhaps the murderer aimed to obstruct dental identification or was adhering to a macabre practice, yet it's also plausible that he intended to eliminate evidence such as a bullet wound. The latter theory seemed most probable, as sawing off the upper jaw would conceal the method of murder. Following this act, search parties discovered additional small bone fragments in the same location. These were scarce and belonged to two distinct individuals, one male and one female. Despite the growing clarity, the emerging picture remained harrowing. However, the definitive verdict from the FBI's Quantico crime lab proved a fatal blow to any accidental theory. After examining the condition of the bones, their weathering, and the influence of microorganisms, the anthropologists reached an unambiguous conclusion. Daniel and Savannah Moore were killed and dismembered around fall 2017, approximately 1 year after their disappearance. A bear consumed what remained of them in spring 2024. Their remains rested undisturbed in this ravine for nearly 7 years before being disturbed by the animal. This revelation altered everything. It implied that the killer didn't merely conceal the bodies. He might have stored them for a year prior to discarding them permanently. Alternatively, he could have revisited the crime scene a year later to dismember the previously hidden but not destroyed bodies. As a result, all case files from 2016 were reopened, and everyone who had been in the park during that time was re-examined. The name of the solitary tourist from Idaho who had camped half a mile from Moros resurfaced in the records. In 2016, his interrogation was merely procedural. He claimed he hadn't heard anything, which closed the case. 2024 saw FBI agents revisiting Marcus Thorne, this time with increased gravity. They embarked on a search for him, and in short order, an alarming discovery was made. Thorne had vanished too. Born Marcus Thorne in 1974, he resided in a humble rented dwelling in Idaho's rural expanse, a 3-hour drive from Yellowstone. His occupation was officially listed as a handyman, taking on odd jobs, minor repairs, carpentry, and assisting on farms. Upon delving into Thorne's background, the agents uncovered a less than favorable portrait. Neighbors described him as aloof and solitary, with no companions and a preference for silence. Some reminisced about his occasional bursts of anger over trivial matters, but these never escalated to major disputes. His only blemishes were 2 speeding tickets. Otherwise, he appeared to be an ordinary grouchy loner. After August 2016, when examiners delved into his life, they unearthed that around a year following Murov's disappearance in the summer of 2017, Marcus Thorne had also gone missing. He didn't inform anyone he was departing. He didn't end his lease either. He merely gathered some belongings and departed. His ex-employer, the proprietor of a minor construction firm, declared that Thorne failed to report for duty on a specific day. They tried calling him for a week, but his phone was switched off. When the landlord of the house where Thorne resided checked inside, he found that most of his personal effects and tools were absent. The food in the refrigerator had spoiled. It was evident that the man had hurriedly departed. Moreover, his vehicle, an old Ford pickup truck, was later discovered. A patrol stumbled upon it on a deserted logging road in northern Montana, approximately 20 miles from the Canadian border. The car was secured. There was absolutely nothing inside. The pickup truck showed no signs of documents, personal items, or waste. Forensic examiners declared the interior had been meticulously cleaned, with no fingerprints or hairs of Thorne found. This suggested deliberate erasure. The individual didn't just leave, they concealed their trail. From that point, the FBI's puzzle began to align. As Thorne's disappearance in the summer of 2017 coincided almost perfectly with the conclusions of the forensic experts who estimated the Murov bodies were dismembered no later than fall of the same year. Thorne was skilled with carpentry tools and had no alibi. He was near Daniel and Savannah's camp on the night they disappeared. The current investigation narrative is as follows. In August 2016, Marcus Thorne crossed paths with Daniel and Savannah on a trail. What instigated the conflict remains unknown. Possibly a disagreement over a campsite, disturbance, or mere coincidence escalating due to Thorne's volatile character led him to take 2 lives, potentially right at their campsite. In a flustered state, he attempted to falsify a bear attack and destroy the tent carelessly and hastily. Understanding that the victims' bodies would be found eventually, he concealed them somewhere close, possibly burying or covering them with stones. He harbored this secret for an entire year. His apprehension may have intensified. He was terrified that a passing tourist or wild animal might stumble upon his hiding spot. And then, in the summer of 2017, he reappeared. He exhumed the remains, which were already decomposing. He undertook an act that left even seasoned criminologists astounded. He dismembered the remains. Likely, he did this to make transportation easier and to complicate identification processes as much as possible. The gash on Savannah's skull might have been an effort to conceal her cause of death, say, if it was a head gunshot wound. Afterward, he transported the remains in his pickup truck for 60 miles north to a far more untamed part of the park and discarded them in a gully. He believed they wouldn't be found there. Upon finishing his gruesome act, he left his thoroughly cleaned pickup truck at the border and vanished. It is suspected that he moved to Canada with forged documents or entered the country illegally. In 2024, the Federal Bureau of Investigation declared Marcus Thorne as the main and only suspect in the double murder of Daniel and Savannah Moore. A federal arrest warrant was issued. His picture, taken for his driver's license in 2015, is displayed on wanted posters across the country and in Interpol databases. It depicts a middle-aged man with thinning hair, sunken eyes, and an empty, heavy stare. 8 years following Daniel and Savannah Moore's last hike, their case provides an explanation, yet lacks closure. On record, it remains unsolved. The perpetrator continues to evade capture. Though the families of the deceased know who ended their children's lives, they have not seen him in court. The official description of the case is suspect identified, but not apprehended. Somewhere, potentially using another identity, in a different city or country, resides the individual who divided a woman's skull with a carpenter's implement, and his whereabouts remain unknown, as does when justice will find him.